Are we live?
Yeah.
I love how it gives like the countdown. You're like,
I know. We're like, are we there? We're there.
oh, what's up?
Well, we're back.
We're back.
Episode 2. Welcome, everybody.
Happy Thursday.
If you are watching us live on Facebook, we say welcome. But if you are tuning in to episode 2, we are excited to partake in the next, I should say, episode, dialogue, discussion, whatever you want to call it. And I'm excited for this one because Justine might be a little not excited on the other side, but I'm excited for it because this is one thing that has been with me for a while and that we've obviously had discussions about.
Yes.
And I'm excited to kind of address those things and talk about the history of Omaha and things there. And so anyways, we wanted to obviously just say a couple things before we get started and make sure that we just lay out that expectation and clarity as far as moving forward with this conversation and dialogue about where we're coming from.
Exactly.
Yes.
And things like that. So I'll let Levi kind of take that away and then we'll jump in.
Yeah. Biggest thing is just, we're definitely in this place, I think, as a country and certainly as a world as well, where we're just dealing with a lot of issues, I think, that are coming to the surface, challenges, things like that, that we're all seeing and kind of dealing with. And it's important for us to keep an open mind and an open heart with everyone around us and those we love, and just really spread love to everyone, regardless of race, color, creed, denomination, whatever it might be. And for us, we're going to share a lot of feelings and emotions and talk about some past experiences. Certainly Justine will share some past experiences. So it's important. Hopefully you guys hear it with an open heart and an open mind. And we're not representing an opinion of one specific group or anything like that. We're here just to kind of share, have a conversation, talk about experiences, and hopefully it'll be eye-opening to a degree to some folks, and then we can use it as a position of learning and growing as kind of the most important piece. So.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, if you guys didn't join us for the first episode, we had Justine on and we were kind of addressing, obviously the things at hand and what has taken place as it started in, I shouldn't say started, but I think everything heated up in our country and in our cities with what went down in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of started talking through that and addressing some things, and then Justine shared her story. For those of you that don't know, or this is the first time listening in, so Justine and I met when we were working together at Grace University.
Yes, we did.
And by far the best person that I've ever met in my life at Grace University.
Hey,
that's a shout out. And it was, I was telling, I met with her son-in-law this morning for coffee, and I'm like, man, the conversations that I would have with your mom and the things we'd pray for, and just the things, like, it was such an encouragement while I was there. And as I, decided to leave Grace and move on and do something different, like, that was the hardest thing for me, was letting go of, like, all the friendships and the people that I connected with there, you being one of them, just because I had always felt like it had pushed me and challenged me to go further in my faith and who I was as a person in leadership. And so thank you for that.
You had open ears and you was willing to hear even the hard things that was said, and your questions always encouraged me, because I could tell that he really wants to know. He's not just asking questions, but he sincerely wants to know. So that made a huge difference.
And I think that's what helps having this conversation as we move forward, because it's like, it's all natural for us. Like, this is like picking up where we left off on, like, conversations that we had at Grace. So with that, I think we can kind of move into kind of this second part. And really, I think for me, when I first heard you start talking about some of this stuff, it was in chapel at Grace, and I just remember sitting there thinking to myself, like, how have I never heard about this before? Like, this happened in my own city, and like I just I didn't know what to feel, honestly. Like, it was kind of like I felt numb, and also just like, this wasn't that long ago.
No,
Like,
it wasn't at all, and I think that's what makes it challenging, because when you kind of don't know the history of what happened, you just kind of go on with life, and then when certain things around you are a certain way, you don't understand why.
Yeah.
And then once you go back and kind of look at the history, lest we forget,
yeah.
Then it could repeat itself, or you may not have an understanding of the why that something seems to come across the way it does.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I say it's time to get in
We
to
want to
this.
hear.
So
You got your boots on?
oh man, my boots are strapped on. I'm ready to do this. But let's talk about this. So, like, the history here in Omaha, for those of you that are listening, obviously our podcast is named Access Omaha. And the goal for Levi and I when we first started this podcast was to connect, our sphere and our network of people to other spheres and networks of people here in Omaha. And so, obviously as you access Omaha, you can access different networks, different people. So we have people on that are entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders in all aspects. And then I think obviously we've set this one aside for our own specific series.
Yes.
To kind of dialogue and talk about this stuff, because we think it's important and it's something we want to be an ongoing conversation moving forward. But before we can even really jump into that, right? Like, you are huge on this, and I love this about you, is like, hey, let's get the context, let's get the history behind everything.
Let's do it.
You can't
Let's
go
talk
forward
about
until
it.
you know where you've been,
Yeah.
where you've come from.
Yeah.
Shed some light. So with that, one of the things that I liked, and I said, well, this would be a jumping point, is you titled this episode, at least for me, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yeah.
And so that made it a little bit easier, because it's not an easy topic to speak of. And, I think things that are worth talking about are not always easy to talk about. But in order for a lot of healing to take place, in certain places, sometimes you have to know what happened.
Yep.
In order for the healing, or to even begin to have empathy as to why do a person feel or think, or a group feel or think a certain way. If you don't know where they've been, it's hard to identify and hard to relate. And so with that, I wanted to use that title and start from the good first. I think it'll be a little bit easier to start there.
For sure.
And just the perspective of some of the things that I saw good about Omaha. Moving here now as a person that didn't grow up in Omaha, and then just moving in. And from being in the military, you move a lot, or you travel and go to different places. And so it's like a personality is in every, city or town, but it's just getting to know that city and town. So initially, my thoughts were, it is a very family-friendly place. I love the fact that it has all 4 seasons. Even though
You're one of the only
change.
people who loves that.
I
That's
do,
true.
because if you're, basically Texas is hot. You have cold, but then you have a long hot. But I really love, my favorite season was fall, and so I do love having almost like that real spring season and a real fall. So I do love that. And if you don't like the weather, like I say, stay around, and it will change, and it does do that. I like the fact that Offutt was right there, and it was close in the base, and that there's an international airport.
Yeah.
That even, because when I called, I thought when I moved here, okay, it's going to be a little bitty airport, and only so many planes or whatever, but I was surprisingly pleased that wherever I wanted to go, I
It
could
is
get
still
there.
kind of a little bit airport.
Compared to others,
Yeah.
it's small.
Yeah.
But the smallness, what I like about it is I don't have to park hours away from the building and take a bus to get to where I want. So for me, it's easy access for that. I love history. I know there was a lot of history here, whether it's Lewis and Clark or just historical things or the homesteading or things like that. So I love the rich history that is here, military history and all other kind of history. I love that. I love that there is a variety of things, to do here in Omaha. Anything that you want to do is always something going on, it's something to do or access. And then I described it as overall, if I give an overall snapshot, a tapestry of city living with a neighborhood feel and God's nature beautifully interwoven.
Wow!
Oh,
Look at that.
I like
It's like
that.
a
I
greeting
like
card
that.
or something. I love that.
So that's how I thought when
Keep
I
that
looked
out of
at
a
it.
magazine.
Now, I did that all myself.
I love it. That's the professor in you.
Just trying to figure out how would I describe it overall. So that's the good, and there's many other goods, but those are just some of the ones that I did highlight, for me
Now,
and my family.
Would you agree too, like when people ask me about Omaha, I'm kind of like, Omaha's kind of like that big city with a small town feel. Like,
Yes.
I feel like everybody kind of intertwines and knows somebody somewhere or whatever the case is. So it's big, we have almost like 1 million people, but it's also like, feels like a small town.
It's small.
So much.
You don't get lost in it,
Yeah. Yep.
So-
Yeah, there's always only a couple degrees of separation between people too.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then, so that's the good, and if to move to the bad, I would say right off the high property taxes. Because you're coming from,
Yeah.
I'm from Texas where we didn't do some of this taxes, at least at the time when I left home. So the high property taxes, sorry guys, but the roads are raggedy. The roads, and then what is this thing with incomplete sidewalks or not having sidewalks?
tell me
I'm
about
used to being able to ride bikes or wait on sidewalks or something like that, but then you walk on the sidewalk and then abruptly it stops.
Yeah.
Or it's only on one side of the street, so I don't get that, but, so that's the bad to me. The other thing that I saw, moving a little closer, is that besides loving all 4 seasons, the weather, it can be unpredictable, it can be moody. It can be moody, but
We
I
talked
know
about
it
that
will
earlier.
change. Yeah.
It's supposed to rain, it's not supposed to rain, now it's gonna rain at a different time.
Yeah, so you kind of give the newscaster a little bit of mercy because we understand that that's how the weather is going to be. But I do like the fact that, it was diversity here, but the bad is it's very segregated. And that's one of the things that I did notice moving in, that it's very segregated, even though you could find the different pockets of culture there, it's segregated. And then I would say the crime rate for a city, this I compare to the bigger city, and you see it sometimes published, or sometimes when I see the statistics, it's coming out of Omaha, it's like overwhelming. So that I would say that's a bad.
Yeah.
But I think some of the ugly that we'll talk about does contribute to, some of these things, and the segregation and things like that. I think it does contribute. That's my opinion.
Yep.
But the ugly, and I would say this ugly, I call it as that pre-George Floyd and building the community.
Yeah.
Building up the community. So this is back then, that 100 years or so. So Omaha, just a snapshot, and then I'll go into it a little bit later, but the Omaha in 1909, there was a white race riot against the Greeks, and I know it burned the community, and a lot of things are going there. So some of you out there, you can fact check or whatever. I'm not doing history teaching today. I'm just,
Give or take a little bit.
So just check, but these are just some of the things that I knew, that I picked up on and knew why it felt the way it felt to me in the city. So that was 1909, and then Omaha, 1919 was another white race riot, and that was with the blacks, involving the blacks this time, and the lynching that I'll talk about later came out of that one. And so that kind of put in perspective for me why I was feeling some of the things that I was feeling when I first moved here. As I was telling Levi earlier, that is more spiritual that you feel these things, or how did you?
Well, I'm just curious. So we talked about it a couple times, just to give a little bit of context. Even on our last episode of the series, that when Justine had moved here, she noticed that there was that there was something weird going on. There was a difference. And we didn't have a chance to talk about it that much, but I was curious because I knew today we were going to talk a lot more about that. So I had asked before we went live and started recording, just out of curiosity, if she noticed these things visually, if it was something that she observed and saw in different pockets and cultural and things like that, or different parts of town, or if it was more something that she felt like a spiritual thing, or more of just an internal sense of kind of what was going on. And her answer was that it was a little bit of both. So it's interesting to hear that perspective and have you share some more about that.
Yeah, so when I began to feel that, and I guess I would describe it as, you know, being an African American, you know, whether you're male or female, in being in the military and traveling, when I go to different cities, because of our history in America, you know, we don't just run up in a town without knowing where you are, you know, and knowing the pulse or the heartbeat of that city, you know, on the spectrum of racism. You have to know where you are so you know how to move in and about for your own safety. And so different cities that I've been in, I can, you know, tell the ones that, okay, they have had more exposure to all races of people and are more comfortable with it. And then there's some cities that I go into and right away I know, okay, I'm here on a temporary duty, which is the TDY, and I'll go get my meal, come back to my room, and just do what the military sent me here to do. So those are some of the things that just come with the territory of being an African American. And so I noticed, you know, individually that when I was looking for, my mom would always say, any black people? I think I mentioned that last time, and I say, yeah, they're here. But as I drove around the communities, I noticed that, you know, it's like, why, you know, why it seems like they're all caroused in this one area. And so doing a little bit more research and digging and figuring it out, I knew about redlining because that happened in a lot, and I know some people may not know what that is, but it's when you want to keep a certain group of people in a certain area, then, you know, the financing and the banks and, you know, the real estate agents and all, you know, we show you homes in these areas that the city has said this is okay for, you know, people of color to live in, or whatever people group that you want. So I suspected that that was happening, but I didn't know the whole story behind some of the other things that I was picking up as I interact with blacks and white. Initially, I didn't know if, you know, you walk into a town or a city, and usually people say, you know, I'm from Texas. So you spoke to the armadillo if, you know, you passed by them. So part of that is just everybody spoke to everyone and everybody smiled. It didn't matter if you knew them or not, you know.
The one finger wave and then you know.
Yes, you just acknowledge another person had walked past you. But I noticed it was different, you know, here in Omaha. And I could literally make eye contact with whites and, you know, and just say good morning or how are you? And they would make eye contact back and not open their mouth. And so you know, so sometimes I'm thinking, well, maybe I didn't speak loud enough or whatever, but over time I knew that, you know, that just may be the culture, that, you know, if people don't know you, then they don't speak. But little by little I learned it's more to it than that story. So the redlining did happen, and so here in Omaha, just briefly, that redlining is, and it's a map online if you want to Google it, because I know the generation like to Google it, so you can see the red line actually there, and the map that's there, so you'll see the boundaries and the perimeter. So that gave me a little bit understanding of where the starting line was, and you know, the stop. I just used to say, instead of Highway 75 being the railroad tracks that they put you on the other side of, that, you know, 75 is like our railroad tracks here. That's how I saw it. And so from 1999 until my mom died in April of 2018, while I was here in Omaha and everywhere I've traveled, she was like my heartbeat, my pulse, for me to bounce things that I've experienced off of so that I could release them, live in the community that I lived in, because a lot of times I was where the population was not heavily African American, you know, where I could easily be the only, you know, black in many of my settings, and that was even true when I came here, you know, going different places and the only black. And so in order to experience the things and the negative things that I experienced, I needed to release those things with someone that I trust, and that was my mom for me. So in order to go into the history, I'm just going to read some statements that I say to my mom. And I want to ask you guys, when I get through them, what is your thought, now coming from your perspective, being, you know, white males, what thoughts come to your mind as you listen to this? So I'll just start, and these original ones is 1999, you know, these some of the initial ones. And so I would say, actually, Mama, I experienced it less in Bellevue than in Omaha, maybe because of the diversity on base. We're used to not all looking the same. Yes, ma'am, I'll be careful. I just forgot to take off my Bellevue hat and put on my Omaha hat, so I was mentally caught off guard when I went there. No, Mama, I just go to Iowa restaurant now. I've had my share of negative experiences at the one in Omaha. Yeah, Mom, black people live here. Except, you know how in North Dakota, the Native Americans are restricted to a reservation? It feels like African Americans are restricted to a plantation called North Omaha. 2010, got pulled over by a cop again, Mom, for DWB in a Lexus. He just wanted to see if I was lost. I told him I live in this neighborhood. 2016, I was followed around a retail store again today. This doesn't happen as often as it used to, except for when I go buy jewelry, of course. 2017, guess what, Mama? I tried the Omaha restaurant again. A few whites still look at me like, what are you doing on this side of town? But it's much better than in 1999. Someone was still served before me though. I cordially spoke with the manager, ate my meal, and declined the invite to have my meal paid for. 2018, got followed in a retail store by an amateur worker. I don't know, Mama, maybe one day the ignorance, prejudice, and fear will stop, but I'm not holding my breath. So just wanted to know what go through your mind as you're here.
Yeah, I mean, I was having a little bit of the same conversation like with Tomba this morning, you know, like when we were having coffee, because he was sharing some things with me, and the first thing that comes to my mind, you know, we kind of talked about this a little bit, and I think I would love to get both of your opinions on this. I was watching an interview with Denzel Washington, and it kind of felt like they're trying to spin it, you know, as they're asking him these questions, like trying to get him to come out and be negative or whatever, and he's very calmly just sitting in his chair, and he starts giving statistics about, you know, the black community and saying, hey, how many of those kids growing up had their dads, you know, and like how many are in prisons, you know, and all these things. And so he starts giving these statistics along with some of these questions that they're asking, and he's like, you know, what I want you to maybe go back to or think of is like, it all starts in the home.
Yes.
You know, and as I was talking with Tom, I'm like, it's so true that like if we look at this and we think about like, okay, how do we change this moving forward, right? Like we're all talking about change, you know, and I'm wearing a shirt like it starts with me.
Yeah, I see.
Like change starts with me, and so like it's up to me, especially as a father now, you know, and having 4 kids, to be like, I need to have these conversations with my kids. Like I need to tell them why I believe what took place in Minneapolis was wrong, right? But even backing up prior to that to other events and things, like we need to have those conversations, and then as me being the father of my kids, to explain to them that like this is the way your mom and I were raised, you know. Your mom and I were raised to respect everyone, you know. Nobody's different, you know, regardless of spiritual background, regardless of culture, regardless of your skin color, any of that stuff. And so you may think that that's the way the world works, when in reality it doesn't, because not everyone teaches those same principles.
Yeah.
And as I hear a lot of these stories, like I'm always asking that question in the back of my mind, like, what's the root of like those things? Like, does it go back to their childhood, or what their parents taught them, or what they heard in school, or what their teacher said to them, or whatever the case is, right? Like, and you see all, and I know we'll get into this later, but you see all these riots, and you see people, you know, going out in the streets and doing all these things and getting into arguments and fights and all these different things, and it's like, what's driving that though? Like, what is, you see all these people getting passionate and angry and upset, and I'm like, I want to know the root, you know, that's there. And I think, I mean, I would say that I agree with Denzel Washington in that interview, where I'm like, yeah, he's right. Like a part of that does start in the home, right? Like a part of that does start with whatever you're going to teach your child, or you're going to exemplify, or you're going to model to them. They're going to see that, and then they're going to grow up probably thinking the same thing, or doing the same thing, right? And so, like, I hear a lot of those stories, and I'm like, it bothers me, you know, obviously for one, that like you feel that way, and especially being here in Omaha, where, you know, I've had that conversation with you and Vanessa a lot of times, where I'm like, man, I struggle like hearing these stories, because it's like that's not how I do business, or that's not how I I don't show favoritism, you know, and I feel like, you know, that's maybe another word that we haven't even used, but like showing favoritism to other people, you know, I don't know that person's background, you know, I don't know that business owner's background or that restaurant owner or that waitress or whatever the case is, but like, again, it makes me go back to like, there's a deep-rooted issue here,
Right.
and
For
how do
400
we,
years, so
yeah, like how do we tap into that and begin to move forward, you know? And I think it does, like you said, start with history, but then, okay, now hearing these stories, what do we do to like address those or move forward or whatever? But that's my initial
What
kind
about
of
you,
thoughts.
I feel like I'm the interviewer now.
I know, I like it.
I mean, I echo a lot of that, but I think for me, you know, I hear when you talk about that stuff, again, your experience is, it's kind of shocking, to be honest. And then, you know, to echo a little bit what Ryan's saying, like coming from Nebraska, even when you're talking about, you know, just people here being different than what you experienced in Texas and stuff like that. Like, it's shocking to me to hear that perspective, because I have always been of the mindset, like, there's this term like Nebraska nice, where people are just Nebraska nice. And, you know, I have friends, I lived in California for a time, and I have friends who would come back and they'd stay with us and hang out and stuff, come to the Midwest. I'm like, man, everybody waves. Why is everybody waving? Like, what's going on with that? So, like, to hear you say, hey, that's not the case here when you came here, it's disheartening, because those are very much my experiences, and very much like the Nebraska that I know, right?
And that's where you see the two perspectives.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%, 100%. So, you know, it's upsetting to hear that. It's also like, I think a lot of this, going back to what Ryan was talking about too, is, you know, the challenges I think we're all faced with today stem from a place of not only a long time ago, but they have a lot to do with an upbringing and things like that, I think.
Yes.
And that doesn't matter if, you know, color, cultural, whatever. We're not talking about a black household or a white household or a green household or a pink household. It doesn't matter. I think that, you know, when I was growing up, I had this conversation with my spouse a couple weeks ago. Like, my parents never talked about race, ever.
Yeah.
Like, I struggled to try to remember a point when they would talk about race, and certainly in a negative context. I just couldn't, in my brain. And that, maybe there was, I don't know. I don't, you know, we all have flaws and sins from the past and stuff like that, but I couldn't think of it. And I was like, you know what, like, that's, I mean, I went to homeschool, VBS, like, I did all this stuff, private Christian school, and I was always around a very diverse crowd when I was a kid. And I think a lot of that was because I had kind of a not normal upbringing in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, you know, homeschooled kids were like, you were homeschooled, right? But then in order to be engaged in extracurricular activities and sports, you had to go to like a local gymnasium where there were these specific groups of people who were doing the same things with their kids, and oftentimes you would have, you know, different colors, creeds, everything. So so yeah, from a young age, I think I was fortunate enough to have a lot of diversity in my upbringing. So it is tough, you know, when we hear stories and we see things on TV and we hear a lot of what's going on. It's hard for me to realize, hey, these people feel this way for a certain reason, when I don't feel like something like that lives in my life. So it's hard for me to hear from someone else who says, no, like, this is, like, I'm living this every day, you know? So it's just, yeah, it's tough, I guess. It's why it's important, I think, to have these conversations and talk about other people's perspectives, because, you know, whether you agree or not with that perspective, this is how a certain person feels. So at the very least, you could open your heart to those feelings and emotions and try to see what their side of the story is, right? And have a productive conversation about why that is a certain way and what it is, you know?
And I would even venture further than, you know, the field, because some things is you know, maybe how you feel, but then it's the reality, you know, and the facts and things. And I think sometimes we miss that it's not just about, you know, oh, they're emotional, or, you know, it's your feelings or whatever. It's no, and that's been the struggle, you know, to tell the stories, because you know, it is a truth that ugly is things that we don't want to look at, because even if you look in your own individual lives, who wants to look at the baggage?
Right.
Who wants to go back in their life and say, "Ooh, I'm looking forward, I'm gonna get some popcorn and I want to only talk about the negative things that happen in my life." Who does that? You know, so no one wants to, but we're talking about you know, trying to figure out or problem solve why does this exist. And maybe in some families, you know, in the, you know, especially in white families, you don't have to talk about race. We have to talk about race, because if we don't, that could be our sons and our daughters thinking they are just like everybody else, even though it's true and they are equal with everyone else. But when you're not treated as if you're equal, or there were books on, you know, laws on the books that said, no, there are 3/5 human in that compromise, you know, and so, and when you're still treated as if, oh, we can do these things because, by the way, you know, they're not really human. And so, you know, if you can get that mindset, you know, that negative, wrong thinking, you know, those teachings that are passed on, then that's why it doesn't cease. And so where, you know, whites may say, can we just go on with life is normal or whatever? Well, our normal, no, we don't want to go back to what life was normal, because normal for us is what now eyes have been open to. And it's not just George Floyd, you know, or the other names you've heard. This has been going, we've been screaming, trying to say, this has been going on for years, but we had no voice, you know, or we had a voice, but if you voiced it, you were silenced. You know, and so this is a time where it does feel very different. It does look very different, because I think it is, you know, very much different. So I would say, you know, taking all what Levi said and you said, Ryan, you know, it's beyond a feeling, and that's what I'm hoping that we understand out of this. It's not just people feeling or being emotional or whatever. It's the real thing. And even when you talk with my son-in-law today, he mentioned, you know, fear, you know. You know, it's a real fear out there. It's not perceived, it's not imagined, you know, it's a real fear. But I don't think the fear, it just stems from black people being afraid for their lives when they go out. I think a fear stems again when slavery, you know, came in. And, you know, and there is a fear. And so if you're afraid for your life, yes, you're going to make sure that you can try to keep things within your control or within your power, you know. And so I think that's why we still have these issues that's going on in our country, and why our country has not healed. And I don't think it will heal until we do what we're doing right now, and more of this. And it's not going to just be talking. You know, it's going to start out as that, because you can't change something until you talk about what's going on and truly get inside. It's like To Kill a Mockingbird. It's going to lead you where we're going. You know, it's like to Kill a Mockingbird. You know, you can't understand, you know, until you get in that person's shoes or that person's skin and walk around and see from their perspective. And I'm going to deviate here a second, and I just remembered an incident where I was an investigator when I was in North Dakota investigating, and we were trying to investigate a complaint. And I was talking to the colonel who was in charge at the time, and we were trying to substantiate some allegations, because we knew we had, you know, feelings that certain things was going on, but it was difficult to substantiate allegations, because again, we're working from old laws. And so, you know, if a certain group of people that wants to be racist or discriminate against you, if they know that it will be trouble if they were blatant, then what do they have to do? You have to now turn to being subtle with it. And so we're operating from principles where, to substantiate, they have to be blatant allegation. Where they wasn't walking around calling you the N-word out in public anymore. Or they wasn't physically taking you and locking you in things or pushing you in things or whatever anymore. It was a different way. And so we continue not to be able to substantiate it, but we sat down and had a talk, and I went through kind of what you were saying, Levi. I say, you can feel it, you know, sir. You can feel it when you walk in, and he couldn't grasp that. And so I asked for permission to kind of step to the left a little bit. He knew that meant, can I take my military subordinate hat off for a moment and just talk to you as a person? And so he looked at me for a few minutes, and he gave me permission. I stepped over, and I began, I'm not going to repeat it, but I began dialogue. And I saying, that's why you can't see it, you can't feel it. But if you go back again, and you do so with my eyes, I guarantee you will see it, and I guarantee you will feel it. And so I'm not going to go through the details of that, but he did just that. you know, and that meant a lot to me, just the fact that he went to do it. Because
Yeah.
he already didn't believe, you know,
Yeah.
and he went to do it, and when he came back, his countenance was totally different, because his eyes were open, as many have been opened
Mm-hmm.
from this George Floyd. He saw it, and because now he saw it, he was now in a position to help do something about
Yeah.
it, to correct an injustice. But until he saw it, you know, you're not gonna act on something that you don't believe is
Right, or
happening.
that you
Yeah.
don't know.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that you don't know,
Yeah.
you know, so that was the difference. So speaking of the To Kill a Mockingbird,
Yeah.
that leads to the ugly, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
part of the history that, you know, it's not like that I take pleasure in sharing it, cause it grieves me that that was here, even though I know that happens, and every city has a story similar to this.
Mhm.
But we're talking about Omaha and, you know, and healing and moving here. And
Yeah.
prayerfully every city will begin to do the same, you know, when some of this dust begins to settle. But I liken Omaha to Kill a Mockingbird, because that's what it reminded me of. And To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, that's required reading. And so you had the Atticus Finch and, you know, trying to represent Tom Robinson, a black man who was falsely accused of raping a white woman. And this is a white woman that, you know, she was a teenage girl, and she was just curious about a kiss. You know, she's there with her father and siblings. She don't see a man, don't have a boyfriend or anything like this. And so here's this black man come along, and, you know, she's curious about a kiss. Well, unfortunately, her daddy, you know, saw her, you know, and so you gotta spin it a different way, you know,
Yep.
and that's where he ended up, you know, on trial. And of course, you know, justice doesn't work for him. But, you know, you encourage him to not give up and not lose heart. But from his history and what he knows, you take me in that prison or whatever, you know, they're gonna have their own justice.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be alive for another trial. And knowing that, you know, may help you understand a little bit of why run, because Tom Robinson ran, you know.
Yeah.
He had a better chance, he believed, running and maybe getting away than to stay there and know that you're gonna be mentioned
Yeah.
at sale or whatever. So that's a little bit of where the running may come from, and I'll let others have that conversation a little bit later. And so I looked at it as Mayella, you know, she lied because she, you know, was curious about the kids and she got caught with it. But the person that was Tom Robinson in this city was Will Brown. And his accuser, I'm just gonna use her first
Yeah.
name, was Agnes. You know, you can see the rest of the information out there, but Agnes, and, you know, it was political. You know, a lot of things, if you go to the, and it's actually on that nebraskastudies.org. And if you go in and click nebraskastudies.org and go to 1900 to 1924, that's where you get all the history, including how did, you know, African Americans get here, and, you know, what was going on in the politics with the newspaper, and, you know, how they spent it, and, you know, wanting to be in positions of power. And that usually is what controls a lot of this, you know, that desire and that pride to have all of this position of power. And so whatever it takes, that's what we would do.
So what time frame was I know you mentioned the range, but like specifically this.
If you
this
click on
occurrence
that
of
one,
this-
if you click on that one, it would have the whole legal story
Okay.
that includes this one.
Okay, okay.
You know, from the piece of the migration, the politics, and then the riots,
Yeah.
and then the lynching, and then the military, police, I mean, the
Okay.
military having to come in and do martial law and
Yeah.
all of that. So in just that little window, if you
Wow.
click, you can pass through and just, that counts.
Interesting.
So 1900 to 1924.
I took Nebraska studies in high school. I don't remember any of this. Granted, I don't know if it was taught actually in high school as a different person. Certainly wasn't paying attention. Sorry, Mr. Huff. I love you, bro, if you're watching out there.
No, but you struck on something, again, the reason why I try to share the history when I find it. It's not always in the history books.
Yeah,
In the
but,
history
yeah.
books that are written, you know, I don't mean this in any way, predominantly white, there's a certain history. Again, you don't want to air all of that, or you don't want to look at it, or you don't want to believe it's there. So, okay, we don't want to deal with that issue. So what do? We're going to sweep that under the rug.
Yep.
And, okay, we'll talk about Martin Luther King, but we're not going to dig into some of all this other stuff here. We're just going to move on. You know, and so we've swept things under the rug and swept it under the rug, and it started out as a little ant, but now it's an elephant, you know, and now it's time to deal with the elephant that's in the room that,
Yep.
you know, we didn't want to talk about and we didn't want to put in the history books. So for a long time, me growing up in high school, I don't even remember seeing people look like me in my textbooks.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
so if you don't talk about it and don't know it, then it's not going to be taught, and then you have another generation that comes
Yep.
up ignorant, of what happened in the past, and so the cycle continues on. So with the riot that came out, they actually end up, when they went to the courthouse, because the mob, I began, believed in one part of town, and they're young, white men, and they're angry because of the, what this person is accused of. So they're going to take matters into their own hand. They march down where the courthouse is, and they want him out, Unfortunately for Will Brown, where there was an Attica Finch standing in the gap so that the mob didn't take Tom Robinson away, and he was willing to put his life on the line. The mayor at that time almost did lose his life because they strung him up. And I don't know the true story about who rescued him or got him down, but they did, strap him up on the light pole there. The mayor.
Jeez.
And then they went to go take Will Brown out, and they did lynch him, and then they did set his body on fire, drug him through the streets, and the pictures are actually there, so you can see it. So, and it looks like that's that picture where they're standing there, his body's on this cross-looking thing or the wood, and you just see the charred body there, and they're posing for the pictures.
Wow.
So that's when I said, now, that explains why I feel what I feel with Omaha. I can understand. So after I learned that from my oldest daughter who sent that information, because I was always telling them, something happened here. Something happened here. And I did try to search it first, but I just couldn't come across it, didn't know how to really search for it. But once she found it and showed it to me, I felt, okay, now I'm obligated. They may not have ears to hear and a heart to receive, but my part is to try to share, because I know that until we talk about even the ugly part of our history, we can't understand a people group. You can't understand what transpired. You can't understand the anger, the hate, the emotions, the injustices. You can't understand it. And so that was my heart, I'll try to share it. And so when the justice with Will Brown occurred, and the riots and all, that's where you see the red line in it. So let's put all the blacks in this particular part of town. And so as we talk about the riots that we're even seeing here, it is not sometimes, it is always disheartening to see the riots, but it's even more frustrating to have it perceived that it's always the blacks that went in and burned down, the towns that burned the buildings or broke in. That was a tactic that was used a long time ago, where the whites went in and, torched the cities or whatever, or, this you can look up too, the Black Wall Street that was in Kansas, and, you're trying to get ahead. You want us to stay in this little place, but then it's that fear of, okay, they're advancing, and so they take 2 steps forward and then you knock them back down, but you need to stay in your place, not only in location, but also the financial place that we want to keep you in. So that's kind of the history that brought us to where at least Omaha is. Are we still there? You can hear from the timeline I shared with my mom that, as we step through it, they're there. Is it better than it used to be? Yes, by the grace of God, it's better than it used to be. But unfortunately, up through George, it seemed like we went all the way back, so it's like we go forward, but then we tango and we move all the way back. And it's like what you were saying, Ryan, it's taught. I don't believe that you wake up, a baby come out of the womb and it's like, I hate.
Right.
It's not, he or she is taught that.
Well, we learn everything. I mean, you learn how to fear, like you ask a baby, a baby will crawl down a flight of stairs.
Yes.
They don't, and they'll roll and tumble all the way down and get hurt doing it because they don't know any better, right?
No.
They don't know what to be afraid of. They don't know. They haven't had those societal things put into their life by, advertising, marketing, the media, yada yada, all the things that make up us, people here in the United States and in the world, about how we are, the things that matter to us, the things that we consume and do, and all those things. So yeah, it's interesting certainly to think that way, where if you use that, and we talked about this on the last episode as well. If you boil it down to what it is in the most simplistic terms, it makes no sense, absolutely no sense at all, to be divided as a nation by the amount of melanin someone's skin tone, you know?
Yeah.
It's more complex than that, obviously, but when you really boil it down to that, it makes me frustrated, because I start to think about these people who started all this, right? Go back to redlining, whatever it was. The guys who were sitting in the desk with their, you know, rolled up sleeves or whatever, that devised this plan to do redlining, right, as it were, or whatever. Like, what was their motivate? Was it literally like, oh, we're gonna, you know what I mean? How malicious was it? Like, I try to put myself in that perspective and think about, like, it's just hard for me to think about their actions and how someone could actually do something like that would have, you know, reverberations and repercussions for years and years and years to follow, even after something like redlining was made illegal back in the 70s. So it's just, I don't know, it's tough for me. Conversations like these, I think, are very important, but it's hard for me really to, I'm of the mindset that most people feel like me. And I truly believe that they do, right? But I think that there's a good amount of people who don't, right?
Yeah.
And I think that most folks, to speak generally, they feel like all of us do at this table, for the most part, right? People have unconscious actions and things like that they may not know about, but I think for the most part, people are loving and caring and open-minded and yada yada. But there are other people who are not, and
But I think you can see a sense of what you're saying through the riots this time.
Yeah.
The crowds look different.
Right.
And so that adds value to, even when you're saying there are more people that think like you, Levi, or like you, Ryan. You could see this time the evidence, because this may be, and I don't know if it was that fear of, you know, well, what if I go out? You know, just think about Martin Luther King, you know, the time when they went out, you know, the risk, you know, of going out to say, I'm going to march with a group of African Americans. Okay, but then your fate is going to be the same as theirs, you know, but, you know, what you're saying, Levi, is evident, you know, in the marching. So I would tend to agree. My spell on it, if I may, is I pray that when things kind of settle down and things open up and Corona is gone, that we don't just go back in our private worlds again, because guess what? The history of George Floyd is going to repeat itself again.
Yeah, I mean, I think an interesting story that kind of goes along with, not really like story, but, you know, as we talk about progress, you know, we talk about like, okay, yes, we're seeing things, you know, change over time, you know, and you mentioned MLK, and, you know, we got to see Barack Obama be the first black president, you know, of the United States. So like, as we, you know, we continue to make progress, you know, I think we're obviously being made known that, yes, there's progress being made, but there's still a lot of racism and hate that, and this is kind of, I think, the conversation that I've been having with a lot of people is, you know, it's easy to point the finger, you know, like in the illustration with George Floyd, and be like, you know, the police department is bad, you know, and there's brutality in the police department, and, you know, to zone in on that, but I've tried to take like the lens back a little bit and be like, okay, is it the police department that's bad, or is it this man that was having his knee on the back of this guy's neck? Like, was he was the problem, he was the evil that was taking place there. And as I take that step back, you know, it's like, man, I think we all know this, and especially coming from like a spiritual background and where our faith is very important to all of us, like we kind of see a different perspective too, where it's like, you know, we know that Satan is up to a lot of things, and there's a lot of evil like within our world too, where like he's capitalizing on the hate, the racism, all this other stuff, and he's using that as leverage, right? And you know, I think as I think about this moving forward, you know, and you brought up MLK, like what, like as we think about this progress, you know, like one of the questions that I think I may have asked or, you know, we had discussed earlier is, like I'll hear a lot of my black friends say, you know, like sometimes I view MLK as like, you know, he talks about this, and we all know the dream speech, right? Mm-hmm. But they're like, that's all it is it was a dream, you know, and it's not a reality. And I'm like, man, screw that. Like, I want it to become a reality, you know, and not necessarily where we're locking arms and we're, you know, walking down a street and doing a silent protest, but more so like, you know, what Levi was talking about here is like, you know, how do we, like, and I want you to speak into this because I have to ask, like, what have you personally seen that a white person may have been doing or thinking that they thought were helping, but in reality it was like hurting the situation, and how can we capitalize off of that now so that as we move forward into the future we're not making the same mistakes, you know? But what's that dream or that vision look like in your mind as far as when you think about all these things we've been discussing? What is it that you're like, man, if we could just focus, or this would be the vision or that dream, like what is that for you as far as how can we not make the same mistakes and maybe bring to light what were some of those mistakes or those things that we thought we were doing to help but we weren't?
Well, you know, just the first part I wanted to talk about, you know, not repeating or whatever. We've already, you know, basically covered it. It's the same thing. You know, the history first, knowing the history, and then having the conversations with, you know, groups. And I'm not just saying white people sit down and listen to black people, you know, but it's both ways, you know, to listening, because, you know, to understand, you know, the feelings or the fears or whatever it is, the only way you get to truly know a person is to spend time with them. You know, I can't get to know Levi. You know, I just met Levi when I came to this podcast. But I can't walk out of this room and say, oh, I know Levi. No, I know of Levi. I don't know Levi. You know, I don't know his history, I don't know his story, I don't know what drives him, his ambition or goal. That doesn't happen until, you know, these mics are turned off and I actually spend some time with him and to learn his background and where he came from and what motivated him. So I think that's the part, and you can't just allow, where we make a mistake, you can't just allow media to tell you about a whole group of people.
Oh, true.
Or your best friend
Can you say that
tell
again,
you,
please?
or allow your best friend or close friends or families' experiences with a certain people group be your overarching conclusion of then it must be all this way. It could have been that person just had a horrible personality, you know, a bad day or whatever, and you know, you may meet that same person and you're like, oh, they're not like that at all. But then, because I heard you say it, and then I heard you say it, then I'm going to stay away from that person or a whole people group because of what Uncle Bobo or whoever, you know, said about such and such a person. And so I think, you know, just the same way the hatred and the racism or whatever is, you know, in the white community and the black community is in every, you know, every community, there's some form of it. And until we start dealing with it in the home, and recognizing it for what it is, but that's difficult if you're benefiting or profiting, or you have an invested interest for it to remain the same. You know, if there's a reason, then you're not going to have those conversations, and you don't want to have those conversations, or you want to pretend that it doesn't exist and it doesn't happen. And so I think those are some of the things. So you know, books that are, you know, written by, you know, telling our story. But then that doesn't mean it's all the facts, because again, if that was one black person's
perspective,
their perspective or their experience, so their background and their history fed into that as well. So
which is important to know, but also you can't paint everything with broad strokes and say that this is the way it is for everyone.
Yes, exactly. And then far as the, you know, things that, you know, may be hurting when you're helping, and I have had several, you know, people of various races that, you know, have seen what is going on and, you know, meaning well, but I also could read sometimes when it's like, you know, you're still in that place where you don't want to think that it's really as ugly as it is. And so you might say some things or brush it off or whatever. Oh, well, maybe it could have been this, or what. Oh, well, that was probably just this, whatever. It's like, you're not listening.
Yeah.
You don't want to hear the story. We realize that there are those stories out there where it's just this, but when you have a whole history and 400 something years of seeing your, ancestors go through this, and all your friends that look like you experience the same thing, it's not just an isolated incident.
Yeah.
So it makes it hard. It's hard to just sit and listen to
There
that
it is.
ugly, but you have to, do it. And yes, is there ugly on the part of African Americans or, whatever color you may be? Yes, there is. My heart grieves when I see, some of the riots or, some of the crimes that are happening. But I also know, whether we believe it or not, systemic issues also led to it. It doesn't excuse it. It doesn't justify it. But it kind of helps you to understand the behavior of what is going on. Just like a military person, when they go over to Afghanistan or whatever, and and they come back with the PTSD, it doesn't excuse the behavior if they do A, B, C, D, but you have a little bit more compassion. You have a little bit more empathy. You kind of have an understanding, and now you know how might we help so that they don't hurt themselves or hurt someone else innocently. That looks totally different. So it's hear those conversations without feeling like you have to say, oh, well, yeah, but, because as soon as you do, but, you just demonstrated you're not ready.
Yeah.
You're not ready for this conversation.
That's good. Even when I was talking with Tomba this morning, he for those of you that don't know, that's Justine's son-in-law, and we were having some conversation, and he said something too that kind of goes along with this that kind of stood out to me, and he's like, it's frustrating when somebody will say like, oh, I know what you're going through. Mm-hmm. When you know that like, no, you don't. Like he said, and he gave a perfect example. He's like, if my wife is in labor and she's like, I'm in so much pain, like telling her like, oh, honey, I know what you're going through, like keep pushing through, like she's gonna smack you. It's like, he's like, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what that feeling is. I will never know what that feeling is. Like, so for me to say like, oh, I know what you're going through, like, that's the wrong thing to say. And I think it all means well, right? Like, you're showing compassion, but I think it's the response, like you were saying too, of like, all you need to do is listen right now, and just let us know that you're hearing us. And then we move forward as far as like devising a plan and the dream and whatever. But like we can't do that until we know that like you've listened, right? And I think that's, I don't know, that like stood out to me from like our conversation this morning, where I was like, that's good. Like, and what you just said was all good too.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on it a little bit, but I mean, and I know you said like, hey, hopefully things go back to normal, things don't go back to normal, and we'll use this platform to spring forward into a new global generation of people who love each other for who they are, and they don't see color, and it has to do with people's actions rather than anything else, and it's all about, us working together as humanity. But with what happened with George and everything that we see that's going on right now across the world and in the U.S. especially, do you think this is the moment, the light bulb moment, or the turning point, so to speak, that will make everyone realize that racism is still exists, it is still out there, hate is an issue, of course, as well. Is this the point that we can stand on and go, hey, that's that point, 10, 20 years down the road, that we can go, I had a dream speech, everything happened actually here. Like, this is when the action started, right? Is that now? Do you think that's now?
I can say, because we've had many moments, where it may have looked like this is now. But like I say, this does look different. I can only say I hope this is, like when I shared last week, when I say I watched the video and was looking at it, and I was like, if this is what I think I'm seeing, I hope this is it. I hope this is the last straw. I hope this is the finale. But like I said, I told my mom, even in situations I experienced, I'm not holding my breath. So you may say, well, either you believe, you don't believe. Well, Martin Luther King had a dream a long time ago, you know, and we have not fully seen it come to fruition all over. We've seen pockets of it, you know, the little black girl and little boy, you know, playing together, white girl playing together, black boy, you know, all those scenarios. We see that even in our own high schools, you know, you see it on the sport team, et cetera, et cetera. You know, you have some that would invite people of other cultures or whatever into their home or whatever, but, you know, to see it on the full, you know, scope, I don't know if this is, you know, the point for that, but I sure will hope it is, and I pray that that this is like that time of deliverance from oppression, and I can't help but to think about Moses, you know, and when I'm seeing all this that's going on, and you know, the children of Israel, you know, wanting deliverance from their Pharaoh and wanting, you know, to be delivered from the oppression, you know, after 400 years of bondage, you know, to have a deliverer, you know, come and rise up or whatever, you know, that's in the sense you say, oh, history is repeating.
That was like in my brain. You literally stole that. Just like,
hey, thank you for letting me borrow that. Yeah, but you know, and so my spiritual side of me is also praying so that this is the time of that deliverance and that rise up. But we know even at that point that even after deliverance came, Pharaoh still, wait a minute, and still pursued, and then God had to intervene. Well, I don't want it to get to that point, you know, where God has to intervene, because woe to all of us, you know. But you know, could some of this be, you know, okay, you know, I'm giving you another chance to fix it, you know, and then I'll come in and fix, you know, whatever the situation is, one way or another, or, you know, well, since you can't handle being a nation anymore, how about we not be a nation? How about that? You know, God forbid that should happen, because then all of us, black, white, red, blue, brown, green, you know, whatever color, you know, would be in a whole host if God should take away his grace and his mercy that he's shining on this nation and allow, you know, you don't know what oppression is until I let another country come in and take over, and, you know, we don't want that. So I pray that we do, Levi, that this is, you know, that peace. And I guess lastly, from my vantage point, I would say that you know, most black people, you know, and you know, whites as well, are sick and tired. You know, we're tired of the hate. We're tired of the racism. You know, and you know, like I said, it's not just everyone. I believe the protests that you see is demonstrating. Okay, we're tired. You know, and we want to move on, not with business as usual, because that was broke, you know, but to you know, a more excellent way, you know, to a better way, where everyone is treated, you know, equal, and not just saying that on paper and saying, look here, we have a piece of paper, you're equal, or you know, someone else, you know, an executive order saying, oh look, you know, A, B, C, D, because we know that nothing is, you know, it's on paper, but until it's actually put into action, and not just put into action and made a law or et cetera, but carried out, you know, then it'd still be just, you know, just a dream. You know, just a dream. And I guess the last thing I did want to come back to, Ryan, you said one more thing, and I wanted to give an example, say making a decision, or, you know, maybe whites not doing, you know, and I understand that, you know, a lot have good intentions. They really mean it. And so that's why I kind of, when I hear some things rubbed the wrong way, I know that, well, I know what they meant, you know. They don't know that that's a trigger word, you know, or when they say this, that, and other, that rubs, you know, certain persons the wrong way, you know. But if me as an African American, if I can't come alongside of you and say, remember when you said such and such, that kind of was not a good choice, you know, and then you can come back and say, well, what would be a better vocabulary word to use? Then I think that's how we can, you know, help the same way you. If I said something to you all, you know, what I may not know that you don't go by that title anymore. You know, what you mean I can't call you white? Or what do you go by? Oh, you want to be blueberry? Okay, you all, you know. But if I don't have the conversation, you know, how do I know? You know that something was offensive, and I would say that on that note, you know, saying don't see color. Some people would use that, you know, oh, I don't see color. But, you know, but some would say, no, see my color, because, you know, I think black is beautiful, you know, and that's what we would say in our perspective. You tell your child, white is beautiful, you know, or brown is beautiful, or whatever. So, no, see it, just don't treat me or discriminate against me, because God intended for us to see the color. If he wanted us all to look the same way, he would not have made Crayolas, you know, to look all different shades, you know, and so.
And I didn't mean to be offensive when I said that before.
Oh, no, you were not, no.
Okay. I just, well, because I said, you know, but what I mean is, like, that is not, it's not a vision thing. I'm not colorblind, obviously, but I think it's important when, and I do think a lot of people who probably use that phrase are coming from a point where I am as well, where they're trying to indicate that like they're gonna treat people exactly the same regardless of what their color is and what their ethnic background is, and that's certainly how I feel. I'm gonna interact with people based on their actions and who they are as a person, instead of what they look like and what their skin looks like.
And this is a perfect example. I'm glad this happens just the way it did, because you see that dialogue that just happened between us, and then, you know, I mentioned something, and then you was feeling a certain way, and you want to make sure, oh, I don't want you to think or whatever, but you know, from my perspective, because I knew exactly how you meant it. You know, so that's what you have to understand a person's heart and know how they meant it. You know, and then go back. So then you don't have that, oh man, you know, that's part of the problem too, when they say, oh, I feel guilty, or no, don't feel guilty, don't feel shame, don't feel any of that. Yes, you know, because I think they can go back to the adversary now, getting in your thoughts, in your minds, and making sure the vision stays in place, because now you walk away thinking, oh, now she's gonna think
you're stewing on
he's
that.
gonna, and then you can't think about all the good conversation that took place, because we're stuck right here. So I'm thankful for that example live. It's happening to show that's what it looked like. And so when I said the last time, we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, that's a perfect example, you know, but be open. And, you know, instead of me going off as soon as you said it, if I came from a wrong heart, I could have went off then and said, well, I'm not doing this broadcast anymore, and I'm leaving or whatever. But that's not the right attitude either. That's not going to solve anything. You know, so I think it's finding that place where we all have to be uncomfortable, just like in Remember the Titans. You know, they struggle.
I love that movie.
You know, that's my favorite.
I love that
movie.
movie.
So I
Speaking
think
of
we all
Denzel
just,
Washington, shout out to
I think we need to
Remember
have
the
movie
Titans.
night right up in here.
I know, I love it.
That is good.
That is one of my favorite movies, and man, I love the camaraderie that takes place. But it's, again, you don't see that take place until we're like, what, halfway, 3/4 way through the movie, because they're working out their differences, and they're yelling, they're fighting, they're screaming with each other. But at the end of the day, it's like those guys are best friends, you know, and that's kind of, you know, as we move into and as we close out this session and kind of give you a sneak peek into, that's like a good segue into like the next one where we talk about the dream, you know, like, and we want to share that and what that kind of looks like, at least for us, and that's a good like picture or vision of like, yeah, that's what I wish and I hope for not only our community and our city, but like our country and our nation, like coming to that point of like just a true brotherhood, like sisterhood, kind of thing there. So there's a sneak peek into like next week's episode, but I have to ask the last question to close us out here. I know we've been talking quite a bit, and we could talk for more, many more hours, but you know, as we talk about, you know, this movement, this dialogue, this communication between us, what I don't want to happen, and you know, kind of falls into, you know, the dream and everything this next episode too, but how do we make sure that this dialogue, this movement, this change, right, that we want to see happen doesn't get forgotten, like you said, you know, once things go back to quote unquote normal, like from COVID and all this other stuff, how do we make sure this stuff doesn't just like get forgotten about or swept under the rug, or it's like the new thing that if something new comes up or whatever, but like how do we start taking this more serious for the season and move on with our lives and take action, right? Because like I think that's, you know, as we think about, okay, now we're having the conversation, right? We're dialoguing, like how do we take action now? Like how would you respond to that, or what would you say
and I think
that looks like?
First, each individual person have to make up in their own mind to do their part. It could be as simple as, I'm going to sit down and have a conversation with my children, you know, about this. You know, it could be as simple as that. Another person could say, well, as far as I'm comfortable with, I'll just write a letter to maybe the governor. You know, somebody may do that. Others may be more bold, and there are some things that they're going to do. You know, so I think as far as individually, and you're making up your mind and committed, even the fact that, you know, you saw something and had this podcast and brought me on. That's significant because there was a day and time this wouldn't have taken place, you know. So I think each person finding their, you know, sweet spot. What is that you could, you know, do? Another person I heard not too long ago, just, you know, because it was so in her heart after she was hearing the story, reached out and, you know, and wanted to know, like, you know, how, you know, can I make a difference? And, you know, and she's willing to go, and I want to just, you know, before some of the older people die out that actually knew what it was like, because you know, you didn't grow up in slavery, that she wants to spend some time hearing the stories from that perspective. And I think that was just so beautiful, you know, that just wanting to hear it before they die out to get a better understanding of what it was like. So I think it begins with each individual person doing the small things and determining and making an action plan. I'm going to do ABC. We set goals for everything else. We set action plans for everything else. And so we put things on the calendar for I want to remember your birthday. You know, I'll put it on the calendar. So I think if we consciously, until it comes a habit, what they say, 21 days or whatever, whatever you need to do for it to become a habit, then that's what we do as individuals. And then if you want to reach out, you know, to get momentum, then bring other like-minded people into your bowl, because everybody's not for you. You know, to bring those right-minded people in that help that single vision, you know, there in his head in the same way. Because, you know, Levi, you may have one vision and it could be awesome and it will work. Ryan can have another, I can have another, but you can't click me with Ryan if it's not lining up with what I'm passionate about. Maybe what you're doing, Levi, is more of what I'm passionate about, because that fits my, you know, personality or my skill set or whatever it is better. And just do that. But I would say do something, because we've seen what happens when we do nothing.
Love it.
Awesome. Wow. Powerful.
Yeah. Again, I just love the conversation, and you know, we'll continue this on. We've got at least 2 more for now, but we're gonna have more moving into the future, and just love having the dialogue and the discussion. You guys, if you're out there and you have questions, comments, you know, whatever it is, let us know. We've made that available for you, especially like online, going live. But even if you're listening to this, you know, you can find us on social media and ask any questions that you might have.
Please keep it positive, of course, and love-filled only. But
you ain't gonna get no love from Justine if it's not love-filled. I'm telling you that right now.
Oh, I know I love my enemies too.
Ooh, I love that too. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening. Until next time,
appreciate it.
It's gonna be great.
Happy Juneteenth celebration for all of you that know what I'm talking about and are going to participate in that. So just make sure you do that safely. And for those of you who don't know what we mean by Juneteenth, Google it like you Google everything else.
Amen to that. Thanks, guys. Have a happy Thursday.
Later.